The biggest tournament of Chapter 3 Season 2 was a memorable one. The FNCS Grand Finals had so many huge teams battling it out for the title across 2 days and 12 games. Here is the story of how Aqua and Vino would win $300,000 by taking the FNCS title in the EU region. The story of Aqua and Vino starts back in Chapter 2 Season 6 when they teamed up with CRR for the FNCS qualifiers, with Vino snaking the players that he had been trying out with. At this time, Aqua already had huge credentials as the Duos World Cup champion and the Season X FNCS champion, both from 2019. However, he had missed the last 2 FNCS Grand Finals through disqualification in Season 14 and then taking a break for a wrist injury in Season 15. Meanwhile, Vino was a player with a far inferior resume. He had just made his first Grand Finals in the season prior, playing with Paddy and Naifa, but he had never won a tournament, and with no offence to his previous teammates, playing with Aqua and CRR was a significant step up. As a trio, their qualification for heats was relatively smooth, but then disaster struck as it emerged that Vino had bought his account from someone else 2 years before. His account was permanently locked and they couldn't play heats. That was a huge disappointment for them, and the trio didn't stay together for the next season. But the start of Season 17 saw him elevated to the highest tier of solo players, with second in the FNCS All-Star Tournament, coming incredibly close to winning with the final 1v1, crowning Tayson as the champion and Vino as the runner-up. At the start of Chapter 3 Season 2, Aqua put out this tweet announcing that he would duo with Vino. Most people did not know what was coming. Aqua was considered one of the greatest of all time, but hadn't won a big title since 2019, and something always seemed to go wrong as explained earlier. He had split with Noah after a disappointing 23rd in the previous season's final. Vino meanwhile had split from Dro after finishing 12th, during which they bullied Chapix and Seti off spawn in South Sleepy. It was yet another sign of his renowned fighting ability that would only be elevated further alongside Aqua. The early season Cash Cup results were spectacular. They had 4th, 6th, 7th, 8th and 1st, in addition to winning 2 of the round 1s, but the consistency of the top 10 results were being overshadowed by drop spot drama at the Command Cavern Slurp Truck. Everybody knew that Command Cavern had the most loot, and not only that, it had the best loot, because of the guaranteed launch pads in the vault and the endless heals and cooler boxes available. If one good team controlled the vault, their chances of winning the tournament were huge. So we had 2 of the very best duos landing at the same place, Vino Aqua and Tayson Thomas. Every tournament, each of the teams would lose off spawn immediately in 1 or 2 games, but they were able to capitalise in the games that they did survive and still had great tournament results. Aqua has historically been a height player. Just remember back to World Cup where he and Nyrox won consecutive games, and I also recall just a lot of Aqua spraying miniguns from height in various early seasons of Chapter 2 as well. Well, this season was no different. With the pads from the vault, they had the perfect opportunity to play in this style, and that's what we saw game after game. They slowly took over from Hen and Queasy as the team most likely to be on height in the EU set lobbies. Aside from the 50-50s at the Slurp Truck, there was another bit of drama for the duo that seemed to roll on through the season. Stories would occasionally emerge of some volatile chemistry between the 2 of them. We'll probably never know how much of it was put on for a show, and Vino claims it was mostly a show, but it was an easily believable story of Aqua the IGL and alpha male of any team, together with the fragger Vino, who had a reputation for being slightly argumentative and sometimes difficult to deal with. They apparently even won a game at some point after muting each other. Maybe it all was a bit of a show for the content, but here are some of the conversations we heard.
Archie, go watch where Aqua runs! Archie, go watch where Aqua runs! That was the point of this, not to watch the drop! Archie, go watch where Aqua runs! I follow him! And then he runs away! Like what? I follow him and then he runs away from me! I said I have the SMG and you get slapped up! 20 feet behind you! Are you trolling me?
You're actually some ass cheeks.
I'm getting trolled!
The community certainly believed that there were some internal issues, and many expected them to split as a duo, but it never happened. On to FNCS then, where Qualifier 1 was actually disappointing for them as they did not make the final. In Qualifier 2 final, they finished 23rd, but their game history was an interesting one, with 4 deaths off spawn to Thomas and his new duo Trippin. They had one other bad game and, of course, a victory royale, the only time that they got to the end game. In Qualifier 3, they finished second overall while contested again by Thomas and Trippen, and were the first team to die in 2 games, but their other games were a win, a second, a fourth and a sixth, and that sealed their place in the Grand Finals of FNCS. But after that, things started to fall into place. Firstly, the Slurp truck was removed from the map, which discouraged the 50-50s. Every other Slurp truck remained, so I do wonder whether Epic intentionally removed it for competitive reasons. It would be a strange reaction, but I wasn't totally opposed to it. Then the Collider POI was added just 11 days before the Grand Finals, which was a POI to finally rival the mighty loot of Command Cavern. Tayson and Chapix decided to claim that drop spot. But let's look at how they won the Grand Final. They were landing at the northwest vent of Command Cavern. In Command Cavern, there is the vault that is the gateway to a huge advantage, and the key card is held by the boss called Gunner. Gunner spawns either on the east or the west of the cavern, and with their drop spot into the vent, Aqua and Vino would get the key most times when he was in the west. Now before Grands, Aqua actually asked me what the chances of Gunner spawning on each side are. People have sometimes speculated that it might be more on one side than the other, so I checked 1000 games and it was 509 to 491, which is well within the expected variance that you would get from a true 50% chance. So with a 50% chance of the vault card, they had plenty of games in which they had 2 pads straight from the vault. As for the rest of their early game, they did trade some damage in Command Cavern to help out with Storm Surge, as this doesn't really have any negative consequence on the rest of their game because of all the extra heals available, but their Zone 1 damage dealt was actually only ranked 30th amongst all teams. And before we talk more about their strategy, let's see how they got on in day 1. After an 8th place in the first game, we saw them on height for the first time in game 2. They looked likely to win this game until Vino died while dropping down very low for a refresh, and Aqua couldn't hold on as a solo. Game 3 was a pivotal one though. A far zone pull is always going to make things difficult, especially in a Grands lobby, and when the zone pulled far east in game 3, they did end up fighting deep in the storm. However, they picked up refreshers at all the right moments and cranked up to height before continuing to pressure the lobby and winning the final 2v2 against Moustache and Malabuka, who actually had an insane 16 elim second place to take a small lead over Aqua and Vino into game 4. If games 2 and 3 hadn't given enough indication that they were the dominant height team in the lobby, game 4 certainly was. In first moving zone, Aqua triple dipped his own launch pad, finally landing on height and hitting a max damage shot onto Hen. With 10 endgame eliminations, they closed out this game relatively easily. A 4th and a 28th in the last 2 games of the day would see them end day 1 with a 17-point lead over Tayson and Chapix, and it did seem like a bit of a 2-horse race already. Before we move on to day 2, I'd like to mention a few stats about their gameplay, and if you saw my stats video about the Grand Finals, you might recognise a few of these. While Vino was the best fragger in the lobby, no matter what measure you use, he had the most eliminations with 27, the most damage dealt with almost 14,000, and he was lethal in pretty much every part of the game, with the most damage in 4 of the individual zones. As we all know, fragging is not the only part of the game though. I was expecting to see Aqua placing more builds, but Vino actually placed almost 30% more builds than him. Aqua is definitely the one making the most calls as the de facto in-game leader though, and his experience and knowledge, especially of the height playstyle, is probably his most valuable asset, and the timing and position of the 20 pads they placed were mostly his responsibility. So onwards with day 2, where they started with yet another launch to height in first moving zone, and another win. This one was relatively easy to close out as they were the only duo in the lobby towards the end of the game. Their large lead was then completely lost in the next 2 games, where they came 25th and then had their only death off spawn in 47th. Tayson and Chapix headed into the final 3 games with a 6-point lead. But game 10 would bring another height performance that looked like a 4th win until Vino went down first in the final 2v2. Aqua almost pulled off a 1v2 with the knock onto Clement, but unfortunately couldn't quite finish it off as Floki held his nerve. That game put them back in the lead, and while 14th and 8th in the final 2 games was nothing spectacular, it was enough to hold the competition off, despite Tayson and Chapix actually taking out Vino in the final endgame just before they went down themselves. For Vino, it was a nice switch of positions with Tayson from the Season 17 FNCS All-Stars mentioned earlier, and for Aqua, it was finally a first major title since the end of Chapter 1. We'll be seeing them with the new FNCS pickaxe next season, and let's see whether they can live up to the even greater expectation that will be on them. Hope you enjoyed the story, see you next time.